Welcome to Unblocked Live. It is Monday. My guest is Kim Brown of Burn It Down with Kim Brown. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
And this is our second time. Yeah, this is our second time talking. We had a good conversation in which we talked about housing. We talked about home ownership. We'll probably circle back to that. Mm-hmm. Today, there's a lot going on. Jury selection has been postponed in Minneapolis. So we'll get into policing and the current trial of Derek Chauvin, which is pushing off in Minneapolis. I'm really interested to get your opinions. We're going to talk CPAC even. I didn't know you had this great CPAC story. I want to play a little intro music, get us into this, I think. And just figuring it all out little by little. Folks, welcome to Unblocked Live every Monday and Wednesday afternoon, youtube.com/Unblocked Live. I'm Jeremy Lee Quinn at JLeeQuinn on Twitter. My guest today is Kim Brown of Burn It Down with Kim Brown. She's a YouTube live streamer. We've had a great discussion before. We're going to cover a lot of topics. As I just said, I'm looking forward to this one on Unblocked Live.
Super happy to be here, Jeremy. Thank you so much for inviting me back.
Kim Brown, thanks for joining us on the live stream. And folks, if you have questions, feel free to chime in. We'll start where we left off, which is we were talking about the other side of the political aisle. Mm-hmm. Folks that I know in the press, and I've listened to your show too, are defined a certain way. And I want to sort of parse that and say, well, who are these people? One thing that you said to me at the end of our last conversation is that there was a time that you thought that maybe there is a more reachable path to talking with conservatives. And there's this clip of you at CPAC. Can you set up what were you doing at CPAC and what year was that?
So the clip that we're about to watch is CPAC 2013, and this was actually my second year in a row at that point attending the annual convention of conservatives. And so this took place right here in Maryland, in Prince George's County at National Harbor. And so I went as a reporter. I was working for the Voice of Russia's radio news service at the time, which I believe has since been renamed to Sputnik. And I was there because I had actually come to know like some prominent conservatives over the previous couple of years. I had met like Ben Howe down at the RNC convention in 2012 down in Tampa, Stephen Cruiser, somebody I kind of struck up like an online, like friendly sort of, Twitter sort of friendship with. So I'm like, well, these guys don't seem completely crazy. So maybe there are even more like less crazy conservatives. So I was sort of on a mission to see if I could like find them / like observe them in the wild, and no other better place than CPAC if you want to see how the right truly, caucus amongst each other. So this particular panel discussion, I'm going to paraphrase it because I can't remember the specific title, but it was along the lines of, are you tired of being called a racist? How to trump the race card, which was incredibly ironic now because Trump wasn't even in, political consideration in 2013, not in the way that he eventually came to be. And this panel discussion was led by these two African-American gentlemen, conservatives, self-described Frederick Douglass Republicans, K. Carl Smith, and his cousin. Or his brother. I think, Jeremy, on my show Friday, when I played this clip, I referred to them as Clayton Bixby. If you are fans of the Chappelle Show, right. This is who I would align these gentlemen with. They are definitely along that Clayton Bixby ideology there. So the clip opens with K. Carl Smith giving his Frederick Douglass Republican spiel, trying to give aid and comfort to conservatives and, they're there. You guys aren't really racist, even though you hate the blacks. We get it. And he begins to get questioned by a gentleman named Scott Terry.
So go ahead and talk over. You can talk over it a little bit. So this is the guy who. Yes. Now this is the questioner.
Yes, that's Scott Terry. Now apparently Scott Terry was at the time like a kind of well-known white nationalist. And who you
What's
don't
that? Lay them
see
out
right
maybe.
away,
Okay.
sitting directly next to him was a
It
gentleman
seems to
named
me
Matthew
like you're
Heimbach,
reaching out to young
who
men in the
had
program you
come to
got
have
going
some
at the
prominence
expense
among
of
white
young men, straight
nationalists
males like
and
myself
white
and my kids
supremacists.
actually.
Actually, he was the founder
I
of the
study
white
Epicurean English
student
literature and
union
stuff,
at
and one of the
Towson
things I
University,
ask
right
my
here in Maryland,
really
and
came to
also went
love
on to
my people and my
have
culture.
some
Okay.
infamous sort
I
of
know that's a national
encounters,
army. I know
as
that's
we did on my show Friday. He was part of the
yeah.
crowd that was pushing
My question would
a
be,
black woman
I mean,
around
I feel
during a
like
Trump
every
rally
politician
in
has
Kentucky back in
this kind of
2016. So yeah,
okay. And
yeah, this
furthermore,
is me looking at him when he talks to me about like white people being oppressed, and I'm like, what? Or talk to me about, or he's talking about, like it's some sort of anathema, I think is the word that he used, to be proud to be white. And it's like, since when? Like, I see St. Patrick's Day being celebrated in huge ways, every year. There is no non-celebration of white ethnicity in the United States, and no one, I don't think, downs people, European Americans, for celebrating their heritage. But it's the concept of whiteness that is sort of unique to the United States, in a way that it's executed as like a caste system, where even now in the 21st century, being white has enormous privileges and benefits just by the virtue of being white. So there's that. So
I
there's
want to just pause it for a second. Somebody said, "Why can't we be segregated?" Who's Terry? Which guy's Terry again?
Rod
That's
Terry is the one who was standing.
he was the this fellow, right? Or where did he go? Oh, that guy.
That's
Or
him. Yes,
that's Terry. So
that's
he
Terry.
said. So he actually asked, "Why can't we be segregated?" In the sense that now this is 2013, right?
That's right. Yes.
Okay. And I need to sort of parse this. I mean, it's amusing in the sense that it's, it is a look back in the sense of 7 years. And we have to sort of discuss about, well, how much do these attitudes, persevere? Now, what was the response when did you just decide to chime in here, or what happens?
It was kind of that, because, so again, I like Scott Terry and Matthew Heimbach were sitting directly in front of me, right? So I don't know them and they don't know me, and I had no idea they were going to stand up, or he at minimum was going to stand up and sort of make this presentation, and I'm sure they didn't know that I was going to respond to foolishness. Like, come on, you guys! Like, I cannot be a thinking black woman in this space and just sort of allow these ideas or these notions to sort of go unchallenged. So it devolved partially into this like raised voices, people sort of going back and forth. That gentleman was telling me something about how slavery was a benefit for black people. It was more than one person who tried to echo that sentiment in that room.
I did hear that. I did hear somebody say, I think it was the original guy, Terry,
Mhm.
sort of set it up that way. Now, what happens here? You come in hot.
That's
I mean,
right.
you
That's
come
right.
in
That's right.
and you go for him, for the moderator,
Of
right?
sorts, because okay, so they opened the floor for questions, and there were other media there. I certainly was not the only one. I mean, this event was well reported upon at the time. Anybody who cares to go back and Google, you'll see there was some extensive reporting about a CPAC panel devolving along racial lines. But so when they opened up the floor for questions, I in in the throes of sort of being caught up in the moment, what I said to the audience was, I'm like, please, my intent was to be like, please do not walk up to random people and tell them that you are Frederick Douglass Republicans and that you're not racist, and here are the reasons that you are not racist, because that's not a good strategy. That may not end well for you. So what I stood up and said, I said, these gentlemen are being extremely like disingenuous about the information that they are presenting, and sort of the instructions that they are telling these attendees at this panel, ways to engage in dialogue about race with Black folks, or ways are supposed to defend yourself against accusations of being called racist. And they just didn't sound like very good ideas to me. And I'll admit, and in the role of a reporter, it was probably inappropriate for me to have done that. But again, I didn't see anyone else sort of challenging what was being said, which I felt was just gross misinformation that was really being lapped up in a big way by the attendees of that panel. Like, people were very like, yeah, that sounds good. I'm thinking, God, no, that sounds actually quite terrible. So please do not approach your engagement of conversations around racism with non-white people in this way. Please.
And so people understand, what is the Frederick Douglass Republican sort of designation mean, or what did they want it to mean, and what came across specifically as being just completely tone deaf, in your opinion?
Well, it's the same way that the works and words of Martin Luther King are sort of cherry picked to, sort of present this utopia without comprehensively engaging the text and speeches that King gave that interrogate capitalism, poverty, imperialism, the war in Vietnam, workers' rights. Like that's part of Martin Luther King's legacy that's not taught to elementary school kids, right? All elementary school kids are taught, I have a dream. And tragically, a lot of people grow up believing that that's pretty much the extent of Martin Luther King's legacy. I mean, the very same can be said about Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass, his words and works are often cherry picked to depict, I guess, in this sense, from K. Carl Smith and his brother, a sense of gratitude that formerly enslaved people would have towards their masters about being given this opportunity to come to this land. And then, as Scott Terry sort of, misquoted about being grateful for food and shelter. It's this intentional misremembering, misinterpretation of history, especially told by the people who were the oppressed in the equation, right? We don't, again, same thing, like the way Black history is generally taught in public schools is this sort of surface level, dogged determination to overcome racism. And again, and sort of racism is sort of framed as like this two sides thing, like it's a problem on both sides, right? Like, if we just work together and if we dialogue, then it's like, no. Only one group is capable of wielding racism as an oppressive tool here. This is not a two-way street when it comes to racism. So it's sort of that odd framing that conservative Black people, and even not even just conservative Black people, even some liberals engage in this sort of duplicitous argument of, if as long as everyone gets heard, or if we all put in the work. And it's like, I've seen where communities of color and oppressed communities have put in the work. It's time for the community that wields the power, that has the resources, to engage in the same work if the desired outcome is racial equality, which, contrary to what people say, that everyone doesn't want that. and that's pretty evident, even in the 20th century.
Well, I'm wondering how much has changed since 2013. And in your opinion, as far as when you go back and sort of watch that, do you do that the same? Does that play out the same way, or is there any way? Because maybe I am one of those people who says, "Hey, can't we find the common ground and figure out how to elevate people of?" I do look at it the way that you described. So, do you look back at that? Do you think that anything has changed, or if things have gotten worse? And what do you base that on?
Well, the subsequent example that I played on my Friday show on Burn It Down with Kim Brown was the Trump rally that happened in 2016. And this was still at a point during the campaign where Trump was not the only candidate standing. There were still several other contenders, trying to win the Republican presidential nomination. And he was in Kentucky, and there was this very famous video of Matthew Heimbach, who was not the person speaking in the CPAC video with me, but the person who was actually that gentleman's companion. Scott Terry was the guy speaking. Heimbach was sitting next to him. I don't think you really got a good view of him, but he was there. And
this is the older guy, or was he?
He just looks older. I don't think he's actually older.
Oh, okay.
that white supremacist life is a little rough. It can be rough on the face. But no. So Heimbach in a subsequent event in Kentucky in 2016. He's bearded, and there's this black woman. She's just being pushed back and forth. Like one white guy pushes her, another white guy pushes her back, and then she's just getting like ballied about at this Trump rally. And Trump is on stage screaming, "Get them out of here! Get them out of here!" So the young woman who does social media for our channel, Molly Shaw, was actually at that same Trump rally in Kentucky, and she and the black woman plus another person actually sued Donald Trump specifically for inciting violence against them. Fortunately, they weren't seriously injured, which is, incredibly, good news. But, Jeremy, sort of to answer your question, like I've seen really like an escalation since that 2013 CPAC panel, right? Like all I got was yelled at, like one of the things that I smile when I go back and watch that video, there's a woman there, I'm talking about Republicans, speaking in either blatant or coded racist language. And this lady in the background quips, "Do you read Michelle Malkin?" And, that was probably like the nastiest thing that somebody said to me, really. But, since then, with this escalation of white nationalism and sort of this normalization of white supremacist attitudes that, the mainstream media has been extremely complicit with. So we have seen an escalation of, language, of hateful language. Like I've been covering the DC protests even prior to what happened at the Capitol insurrection on January 6th. In November and in December, there were two previous white supremacist rallies, Trump supporter rallies, where activists in DC were being attacked with racial slurs, random people on the street who had nothing to do with, being in defense of the streets, were being attacked. So, this is when the Black Lives Matter signs were turned
down.
Versus, yes, I get problem grabbing my words there, and burned. It was just, so we've seen an escalation in the violence, and January 6th, I think, was pretty much the pinnacle of that. But what made January 6th so interesting was we have not seen like a white supremacist mob turned directly on the national halls of power, right? We saw sort of glimpses of it in the summer of 2020. I'm thinking specifically about the armed people protesting the mask mandates and the lockdowns in Michigan and Ohio and Washington State. And of course, the threats against Governor Whitmer's life and Governor Ralph Northam in Virginia. So, I mean, it has turned all the way up since 2013. It has gotten way worse, and it is definitely not over yet.
Well, I have a very different view of this because I've been traveling across the country over the last, 8.5 months up until recently. And I was in DC. I was there in December. I was there before December, and I was there on January the 6th. Mm-hmm. And I've followed closely both Black Bloc on the left, and I've followed the quote unquote patriot or MAGA Trump supporters on the right. So I've been in and out of all of these spaces, including even like a Proud Boys rally in Portland. And I've seen this stuff up close. And the reason that I asked is, have things changed since 2013? I distinctly remember as Donald Trump's horrific sort of ascension to the nomination, from a left point of view, I couldn't figure out why it was happening, especially if we just had 8 years of Obama. From the left, we're looking at this thing going, what the hell is going on? And you're hearing,
I knew what was going on, but go ahead.
Well, you're hearing rhetoric like that. And then Charlottesville happens. And yes. Charlottesville is the complete manifestation of exactly what you characterized just now, which is white supremacist, white nationalism, very clearly with their shields, with their signs, et cetera, and then you have the anti-fascists who are also, militarizing, albeit without arms in a lot of places, but in some places with long guns and so forth, as I saw in Louisville and Atlanta in the last year, just depending on what gun laws are. But what's interesting to me is after Charlottesville, something happened. And I'm not sure if this has been worked out in the press or talked about, because if you go back to 2017, you Google Charlottesville, Antifa, Daily Beast, Vox, or Washington Post, the whole editorial board came up and said, are these Antifa groups advancing, or are they adding fuel to the fire. I'm paraphrasing, but that was essentially expressed by our media that said, hey, we got to also look at this on the left. But something changed. And I think the possibility of Donald Trump's reelection freaked us all out in a sense that we stopped covering the possible excesses on the left. And I do look at this as I look at violence as cyclical. It's Newton's law where every action has an equal opposite reaction. And I'm not convinced that the crowd that I saw on January 6th is the same. And other reporters who are on the ground, we've talked about this. I'm not convinced that they're the same people that were on the ground in Charlottesville. In fact, that leadership in Charlottesville, specifically Richard Spencer, the white supremacists, they all had huge legal troubles after that. Mm-hmm. And the leadership and the structures were decimated. In fact, there's a group that marched through Washington, D.C. at the very end of January, mm-hmm. and they're called Patriot Front, and they're really weird, and they look like mummies. They have these white, things that cover their face, and they are the actual remanifestation of that Charlottesville, one of the groups that was there that James Fields, the one who drove his car into the crowd, was linked to. So when the actual white supremacists show up, the real, because there's different things going on here. There's maybe some cultural misunderstanding, possibly even ignorance. I mean, we could define it. There's a lot of things going on. But as far as the actual white supremacists who are like, we want to make this a white supremacist nation, the ones from Charlottesville, they marched on, I think it was like the 19th or so of January, and there was barely a peep. People barely paid attention because the real white supremacists suck, and the Republicans don't want anything to do with them, I would maintain as well. What do you think about that? I'm just curious.
I mean, why wouldn't they want to deal with them? The Republicans, that is. I mean, not to say that all people who vote Republican are white supremacists, but I would imagine that most white supremacists who outwardly express those values do vote Republican. And that's not to say that there aren't plenty of liberal racists and Democratic racists. Let me make that very plain. Racism, unfortunately, in this country is not a partisan thing. Both parties engage in it, pretty regularly. Perhaps they engage it in different ways, but the outcome still remains the same. So what I think, and I may be inclined to agree with you, Jeremy, that the crowd in Charlottesville was not the same crowd in DC. And from what I have been able to gather from other journalists that were there on the ground, is that the crowd in DC was well-heeled in the sense that, no, were these people, showing up in, haute couture clothing? No, but they were there in expensive tactical gear. They were there with a lot of, expensive communications gear and military gear, and they were there. They were well trained.
This is the tip of the people who actually breached. There were they counted them to be about roughly between 800 and 900 people that were at the front that went in. But I would say what's interesting is only 1 in 10 of that 800 belonged to actual organizations like the Proud Boys or militia. Only 1 in 10, according to the Atlantic University of Chicago study.
Yeah, and that's more scary, in my opinion, because then you have the rest
populist. Yeah, you have a populist. Yeah,
you have quote unquote regular people, your real estate agent, your kid's teacher, the nurse at the hospital, like that. What I think January 6th revealed to the rest of America that I think a lot of, non-white America already knew is that racism does not live in the trailer park. Racism lives in nice penthouses, in very exclusive zip codes. Racism is extremely educated. It is not this sort of ignorant backwoods, trope that we would like to tell ourselves that, people are racist because they don't know better. That's incorrect. A lot of the people who attended January 6th insurrection, got good jobs. These are professional folks.
Business owners. A lot of people were business owners.
But business owners, former military, former law enforcement, this is what freaks out Black people on a regular basis. Like, we don't know who we're dealing with at any given time, right? Police in law enforcement notwithstanding, like, anybody can hold these incredible, crazy views and you never know it, unless you happen to catch them on the steps of the Capitol, right? Or unless these racist views and attitudes sort of present themselves in a myriad of different ways, even in the way that you and I have discussed before about, housing discrimination and people of color having access to being homeowners, like, I mean, a person who holds, supportive views for Donald Trump and his ideas might not want Black people living or non-white people living in a certain area, and they can steer or they can use their power in ways to influence to make sure that those boundaries still remain in place. So,
and that's going to be an interesting topic to explore a little, which is, yes, they could, and I understand your perspective, and I'm glad we're talking about this so openly, because the question then is, well, are they? Is that really what's going on? And that will tie into police violence as well, which is, there is a new study that was out that when you ask the left as to how many people are dying, and people of color are dying a year from the hands of police, there's a little bit of a distortion in the sense that people believe that thousands of people of color were dying by the hands of police. And it's simply, we'll look at the numbers. I do have those pulled up. And there's a very different situation when you look at the actual statistics. So whereas I want to honor, again, expressing and, your perception, I'm not sure that this crowd has been the same, because as I've gone to these Trump rallies, I went into it back in June. Tulsa was the first place I went, and I was looking for white supremacists. The angle of my piece was going to be about finding the white supremacists. I got to the Tulsa rally. I checked. I talked to people. I saw a couple people with Q shirts on and stuff like that. They were, every now and then they'd pop up. Some of them were actually quite, I don't know, just civil and normal. One of them, I didn't at that time, I was a little timid to like really go there. But of all the thousands of people, I found one guy who had an 88 tattoo on his calf, and he could have had a prison record. I don't know. I didn't go up and say, hey, what is your 88? Of course, is code for Heil Hitler. And so I found one guy that had this tattooed in the crowd of thousands. And I looked everywhere for some sort of Proud Boys, and then later in the day, a couple Proud Boys showed up. It was just a handful of them and a couple guys with Hawaiian shirts. I talked to them. I talked to the guys with the guns. They're like, no, we're about Second Amendment. The Proud Boys got in it. There was just like a handful of it. And they were yelling at Black Lives Matter back and forth. And then the weirdest thing happened. A guy with a Rasta tan pulls up, lights a joint. One of the Proud Boys guys lights up with him. They start smoking. And then the guy plays Bob Marley, Is This Love? And a couple of the Proud Boys were just chilling. And then everybody went away. And it was the most bizarre. Oh no. But then they came back, and then the police pepperballed everybody. And the whole crowd was dispersed once Trump was leaving the actual arena. Okay. One other thing happened. A police bus tried to get through the road, and then the Black Lives Matter / Antifa aligned group blocked the police bus, and then they pepperballed everybody, and everybody got hit. If you were a Trump supporter, if you were an evangelical with a sign that had your favorite Bible verse, everybody. If you're a journalist like me, you just got pepperballed. It was the weirdest thing, but it made me realize in that moment that I'm not sure when it comes to platform white supremacy of let's get rid of diversity. First of all, the Proud Boys is a diverse group. I don't want to defend them or anything like that, but I'm just saying we have to recognize certain qualities before we say, hey, everybody is a white supremacist. And this is where our conversation ended.
But you do understand that even non-white people can engage in white supremacy, right?
Sure.
There are Black people that engage in white supremacy. There are Asian people, Latino people.
But are you talking about unconscious white supremacy, or are you talking about a white supremacist platform white supremacy?
I mean, I think a lot of it's a combination of both, right? There are people who uphold the values of white supremacy, even people who are not white themselves, either through colorism or, through the eyes of trying to, be anti-Black in general, or, non-white race, whatever category that falls in. I mean, a handful are outward white supremacists, but I mean, I definitely think that they are in the minority. But just because an organization that extols the values of white supremacy has some non-white members, I mean, that does not make them, that's not impressive, right? That doesn't make them less racist. I mean, maybe it might make them slightly less racist. I mean, but even plantations had overseers to keep the slaves in check, right? It wasn't always like the white master looking,
But you have to open yourself to the possibility that what they're against are the excesses of the left. There's the black bloc and people who want to burn it down. And that's the question of how literal is the title of your show, Burn It Down with Kim Brown? Is it metaphorical, or are we talking about it was okay to burn stuff down this last summer?
Oh, it's both. It's metaphorical in the sense that we need to burn down the systems of oppression that keep people relegated in subservient sort of conditions and even horrible living conditions. In the concept of poverty, especially now during the pandemic and the economic crisis. I mean, we see how fragile life is in America, where all the things that we were taught about communism and socialism, that there will be food lines down the block and people won't have access to medicine and socialized medicine. Well, people don't have access to medicine right now in America. The price of insulin has shot up exponentially, whereas people were used to be able to treat their diabetes very easily. Now it's a challenge. People are rationing things like insulin in the United States. We have food lines across the country because people are struggling tremendously. But so we need to burn down the systems that have the wealthiest nation in America, in the country, in the world, allegedly, but still allows tens of millions of people to go without health care, to be hungry, and to be incarcerated. But the literal part of burn it down, like, for example, during some of the uprisings that happened in Minneapolis after the murder of George Floyd, when demonstrators burned down the police precinct there, I was elated. I thought that's wonderful. That is a perfect example of the people rising up to say that the issue or making law enforcement a priority in this community is something that the community does not prioritize. And there has been a realignment, or at least a very, very, very strong attempt of reallocating budget funds in Minneapolis, driven a lot by the organizers and activists there. Organizations like Reclaim the Block and MPD 150, who have been putting out a lot of information and a lot of strategies about how to best engage in community safety without pouring tens of millions and hundreds of millions of dollars into law enforcement. So, I mean, there are some aspects I believe need to be burned down, literally and metaphorically. So yes, the title is both.
I understand what you're saying now. In regards to Minneapolis, that's a much more complicated issue that I do want to get into in regards to actually an explosion of gun violence and violence. And there is a current occupied zone in Minneapolis, George Floyd Square. I've been there, and it's a stretch of two blocks radius, residential and commercial. Somebody was shot and killed there this weekend, along with two other shootings in Minneapolis. And there was another shooting at that space back in December. So the subtraction of the police force, and we'll look at statistics, but basically what's happened is we've seen an explosion of violence that when you look at city by city is a bit concerning. And so I do want to parse that a little bit. There is something, another thing that happened is they burned down an Indigenous center, which was right across the street from the precinct. It was an Indigenous learning center.
Well,
a lot of stuff gets burned down.
Well, number one, activists in Minneapolis will tell you, and actually this was even reported by the Star Tribune, there were a number of white nationalists, white supremacists who blended in with some of the demonstrations there and caused property damage, caused vandalism. I believe some of them were even charged with this. So if you give me a moment, I could probably Google it. But
well, there was a lot
of that happening.
Well, there's the Umbrella Man. The Umbrella Man. Now, I will say this because I've watched so much video on Minneapolis. It's hard to tell which ones are the white supremacists or which one are anarchists. Who's anarchist? Now, of the outliers, those who are doing stuff that might have been out of the populace. For example, on January the 6th, you had John Sullivan, aka Jaden X. It would be wrong to say, okay, Jaden X is an anarchist or left-aligned infiltrator, and therefore that's the reason that the Capitol happened. That would be absurd. No, the crowd was at critical mass, and that somebody was there that was anarchist, anarcho-left, is not representative of the crowd. Likewise, Umbrella Man is the probably most famous Minneapolis outlier. He was a Hell's Angel, and he dressed in black bloc. He had a black umbrella, and he smashed open the windows to AutoZone. And when AutoZone went up in flames later that night, this is, I believe, the day before the precinct burned, that was the first building to burn down. So whereas it's true, yes, you had these people who were chaos agents who were out there, but you also have an anarchist scene from Minneapolis, a leftist revolutionary political scene that goes way back, even to the 60s. There's the anarchist, there's the record store, but there's also the anarchist bookstore, which is a coffee shop. And there's a mural of the Weather Underground if you go around to the back that I saw. So there are roots in the revolutionary political scene in Minneapolis that go pretty deep. I do want to maybe just look at one question. I saw one earlier just to let's see, where was it? Here, this is, I think, an interesting question. Kim, do you believe the BLM protesters were also racist? Do you believe the majority of the January 6th protesters were racist? Do you think it's well, come on, man. I think this is I'm going to show you some stuff that maybe might change your perspective. I hope by the end of this talk.
Change my perspective from what to what exactly? You know what I mean? Like
from laughing at a question to taking it seriously.
I mean, I could never take are the Black Liberation Movement protesters, are they racist? Like how? Because to me, what we witnessed was one of the most racially inclusive uprisings nationwide that this country really has ever seen. You know, absent of the civil rights movement, where we had a lot of young white people coming from, you know, places like New York City and up north coming down south to help register Black people to vote and participating in the freedom rides. But I saw a very multicultural, multi-inclusive movement in every single demonstration I saw from city to city. So I'm just curious, who are the Black Lives Matter protesters being racist against? Like, I'm just trying to understand the question here.
All right, you set up this video that I'm gonna play then. This is November the 14th. Mind you, we have just won the election, we being me of the left, and this is November 14th. Now, if I make this big, can you see this? Now, there's an important distinction here in the daylight video, and there's one famous person from the right, but this is, do you guys see the full screen now?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
This is the Punch MAGA in the Face banner.
Yes.
That made its way through DC after the left has won. And these are
when
two
you say left, I kind of take issue with that. If you've been following Joe Biden's career at all, Joe Biden is not a member of the left, nor has he ever been, nor will he claim to be. So Biden is not a leftist by any means. But go ahead.
Okay. All right. Now I understand what you're saying. So I'll say, if you're just looking at it as Democrat, Republican, the Democratic win. Sure. This is, I don't want to overplay this. I just want to see a little of it. This is right near BLM Plaza.
Right. So is this the same video where the gentleman was attacking women and then he got knocked out?
You'll see that at the end. You'll see that at the end. Because I made a note here. Now there's something that you see right here, which is a guy with a bullhorn who I've seen many times is also in this clip. But you know what? You'll see a bullhorn in the corner here. I think there. You see that bullhorn? That's the kid that's going to get attacked later. Which, you know, there's no reason for any of this, in my opinion. I am a pacifist. I'm against violence.
Well, I mean,
There's
I
a
would
woman-
disagree, actually.
That
Like,
woman's coming at the guy at the camera with a, you hear that? That's a taser. Now, these are unilateral attacks. These
Mhm.
people were leaving the Million MAGA March
yes.
on November the 14th. The Million MAGA March, and which, you know,
Yes.
and so this, I interviewed this couple. That's a medic, an Antifa medic that sprays chemicals on them right there.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know who is who. I mean, I guess I have to take your word for
now.
it.
Look, now this old man that gets pushed, and
Yeah.
you know, if I'm gonna, I think the normalization of violence. There's a Thai man in the San Francisco Bay Area that I was from that's
Mhm.
pushed over exactly like this and
Mhm.
killed in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Right.
And he has water poured on him. Now, I don't. I think you know. I'll fast forward a little bit. Then at night, you had fireworks going off. There is one high-profile daylight clip showing the right is the aggressor. When I say the right, I mean the Million MAGA March. He's called Roma Jacket or Rome Jacket. Note the megaphone guy on the left. Proud Boys retaliate later at night.
Mhm.
So that's when they tore down the Black Lives Matter signs and so forth later the evening on November the 14th.
Mhm.
So I point out the megaphone there because I think he's going to be a target, that kid. But this clip that we saw earlier, unedited, and it was the Daily Caller, which is, you know, they have young people that they have sent that are, you know, mainly conservatives that have been city to city, but they leave their camera roll. They leave their camera rolling. The MAGA rally was 1 mile east of Black Lives Matter Plaza. So if you were going to this other side, this is the scene. Now that guy in black block is actually somebody who's an infiltrator, I believe. Yeah. So he's so this is how confusing and just utter madness it is, even November the 14th. And this is the clip that you're going to see the kid there. His MO, he gets attacked there, but his MO is to he almost sent the crowd after me at one point because I was filming. So now this is horrible because he starts it. This guy starts it clearly, and then he's going to get his ass kicked right here in a moment. And it was cut in an opportunistic way to show him he's going to get laid out on the concrete really hard and violently.
Right.
And that's going to happen, right?
I mean, but here's my thing. Like, okay, so number one, I live in this area, so let me start.
This is your.
And I couldn't agree more with the residents of DC or people who came out from the area to meet the MAGA protesters, because white supremacists cannot be comfortable rallying in spaces, especially in your neighborhood, in your city. Now, I know Washington, D.C. sort of holds a very unique position of being the nation's capital. And so a lot of political demonstrations happen here. There's a way of making a big splash, you know, with their political speech. But no, if you're a district resident, you better show up. And you better meet them white supremacists in the street. And if they talk crazy, punch them in the face, because it's not welcome. By giving comfort and making a comfortable place for white supremacists to come and spew their racist nonsense, we are enabling the re-rise of violent white supremacy that terrorized generations of Black people, of brown people, of people of Asian descent, of indigenous people. We have to remember that we're not far away at all, time-wise, from a period where it was quite okay to murder Black people, to murder indigenous people with impunity and not face any sort of consequence for it. It's only a recent phenomena that the murder of non-white people is actually something that gets prosecuted. And we have to keep that in mind. And that's something that I know that people of color never lose sight of, because we see attacks on our constitutional rights and our civil rights happen on a daily basis. We are seeing a lot of legislation right now being introduced at the state level to roll back voting rights again and still in the 21st century. So this is an ongoing fight for people's freedoms, for people's right to just live, for people to exist. And if a white supremacist who does not live in DC, or maybe who does live in DC, you want to come DC and talk crazy, well, then you got to be prepared to put your hands up, because you might get punched in the face. And I don't have a problem with that. Punch him harder.
Well, but see, when you punch, again, then somebody else gets punched back.
That's right. And
again,
but if you're not willing to fight for that, then what are you willing to fight for? And that's
what are you convicting them on?
They want to fight for their right to be racist. Okay,
but you better be sure that was a white supremacist.
Trust me, I don't think that gentleman would have gotten attacked just for no reason. Given the amount and the number of white allies that have been out in the streets with the protesters here in DC, they absolutely know who is who. And they know if somebody is talking reckless or talking crazy. They know who they are with and who they are not with.
Wait a second. Sorry, but
I don't want a race war, you ninny. Who is this in the comments? Jojo.
Is that what
listen, here's the thing. But it's so interesting that somebody would actually say that, because let's look back at the history of the United States. Anytime a community has been burned to the ground, has it been Black people coming to white people's towns and burning them to the ground? Or has it actually been the reverse? Every single time. Like, I can't engage with these discussions about like sort of racism is like a two-way street, right? Like, oh, well, white people are racist sometimes, but Black people are racist sometimes. Well, listen, but Black people's racism doesn't preclude white people from having any sort of opportunities whatsoever. It doesn't impact where they live. It doesn't impact where they work. It doesn't impact where their children go to school. So you can say Black people are prejudiced or can be discriminatory or maybe crack jokes about white people, sure. But Black people have literally no power over the way white people live, whereas a white person with the single drop of a phone call can affect the trajectory of a Black person's life forever. So cut it out. Whoever's talking about starting a race war, bro. Every single racial attack in America has been white on indigenous, white on Black, white on Asian. Like, spare me that stuff, dog. I don't even want to hear it.
Well, wait a second, though. But in the clip that I just played, there were several instances where we're convicting people, if I am to agree with you conceptually, that we're convicting people on being white supremacist based solely on the support of Donald Trump, which goes to the question. Right. But what I learned, and, I see that the same person who asked the question suggested, well, what I learned is when I covered these events, when I went to them, that the people were not platform white supremacists that I saw, and that there were more moderates. There were like gangbangers for Trump. They were literally in Sacramento that were out just like pumping. Something changed. In other words, I'm talking about since Charlottesville, there was something different about this Trump crowd. We know that he increased voters among, his support among Black men and people of color. And
marginally, though,
marginally, but it's significant. I mean, 1% or 2 percentage points is still, I'm just saying that when I went into the crowds and was covering this stuff, like I mentioned that I went to Tulsa and I was looking everywhere for white supremacists. I didn't see the stuff what you recounted from 2013. There's very specific rallies where people of color were tossed out, and I didn't see that happening.
Well, let me ask you, but Jeremy, so when you were in Tulsa, did you see Confederate flags? You didn't see any of that?
Sure. I saw Confederate flags. I saw a guy with a bicycle. He had a children's bicycle with a giant pole and a little tiny Confederate flag, and it was the weirdest thing I'd ever seen.
Was it the only Confederate flag that you saw?
I wouldn't say that I've seen ubiquitous Confederate flags everywhere. It's usually like some outlier who's like heritage or whatever. And I don't know that it's necessarily, see, this is the thing. I don't know that it's touted as, and I don't want to apologize for the Confederate flag. I'm not pro Confederate flag. But again, usually if it's that one person who has the Confederate flag or the racist T-shirt that they custom made, because all of these T-shirts are, somebody has to go through the process of custom designing their anti-Semitic T-shirt or their horribly problematic. these people are hard to find, is what
Not
I'm
really. They are not.
They're not entirely. I don't have proof that they're entirely representative of the crowd, and that was the
Yes,
question.
I would agree with that.
They're not representative of the
Well, I
entire
mean, how exactly can you know unless they display it, right? I mean, but I guess so that's where kind of we differ. Like, I would assume that even the attendance of someone at say something like a Trump rally is de facto endorsement of Donald Trump's policies, his positions, and things that he has said previously about Black people. I mean, and speaking directly to the Confederacy, Trump was trying to hold up the last military spending bill that was sitting in front of him towards the latter part of his lame duck term because the bill would not rename bases in the South that are currently named for Confederate leaders. So you understand, like, this is the support of the Confederacy still remains very much at the federal level. And if you support the Confederacy or the upholding of that portion of Southern heritage, what else is that but racism? I mean, that's what the Civil War was fought about the ability to still own Black people. So if you support the Confederacy, I assume that you are racist because that's what the Confederacy stood for.
Right. And then culturally, somebody might actually mean it in a different way. And this
they can
debate's
mean
been
it
going
however
on.
they want. History,
Yeah.
I mean, you can, history tells us the tale. So maybe people should be more informed about what it is about the symbols that they're choosing to wear. But I don't think people are wearing these symbols out of ignorance. I think they know exactly what they mean.
Well, and I think they know exactly what they mean too, but I'm not sure what they mean is exactly what you think they mean, in the sense that some of these people are very much against the array, what they consider to be. I don't know how to even discuss this without coming across as a sympathizer or not, but there's the idea of basically subtracting parts of history, and so they see themselves. Now, I'm not saying that go out with a Confederate flag. It was weird when I was in high school. There were kids that showed up with a Confederate flag in Northern California.
Yes.
I mean, I made fun of them relentlessly. I was the rally commissioner. I was doing one of the rallies like senior year, and I mocked them for their Confederate flag, and the rest of everybody in the auditorium cheered. Because it's ridiculous, especially in Northern California, and these guys who are trying to identify as Hicks are toting the Confederate flag. Anyways, that's a little bit of a tangent. The point is that do they mean it? Is ignorance and racism the same thing?
No,
is
absolutely
platform
not.
white supremacy and ignorance the same?
No,
right?
They are not.
And I'd say that a lot of times, I don't know that the platform white supremacy is working on the level that we think it is, because we get it through our headlines, our echo chambers, our obsessions that are playing out in media and Twitter media, which focus on race over and over again. And that's just something I want to just propose, that maybe the media does have more influence than we realize when it comes to distorting, especially statistics when it comes to police deaths and deaths, as far as gun violence, who's killing who. One study showed that it's actually very similar as far as white people killing white people is up in the upper 80s, and 90% is the same as the percentage of Black people who are killed by Black people. That we don't have this large cross racial a fight going on of
right.
people killing each other.
We have to ask that question. I think that's a brilliant question to ask, because that is a big talking point on the right. What about Black on Black crime? As if white on white crime isn't a thing, right? As if the instances of white people killing each other or committing acts of domestic terrorism never happens. It's just Black people committing crime, but you got to know better. And I agree with you about I don't know how much police killings of unarmed people is distorted. I mean, it's at a consistently high number, between like 700 and 1,000 over the past several years. But that's a number that nobody sort of blinks an eye at. Nobody asks, why 700 people or 1,000 people were killed by police, because we have been conditioned in this country. And thank you so much to the people in the comments who say that I am brainwashed, and I appreciate y'all, giving me something to laugh at. But we are conditioned to accept the police narrative at any turn, regardless of what the police say happened. If the police say that they felt as if their life was threatened, all of a sudden, this is a justified shooting or justified killing. And there has to be so much explicit evidence to contradict the police narrative of what happened. There's so many names I could go through right now in examples of that, of when that has happened, even in the recent past. But that's a way that we are brainwashed. Let me use the people in the comments words. that is a way that we are brainwashed. So I mean, but in terms of how we perceive issues of race, or whether or not racism is in fact distorted. I mean, I think that people have a tendency to forget history, right? Just generally. We think that somehow, and I keep asking people to please, can you show me the year in which racism ended for Black, Indigenous, and Brown people? Like, what year did this happen? And people say, oh, well, slavery was ended in 1865. Yeah, it was. But then we engaged in 100 years of racist apartheid in the United States, where legalized segregation was happening in housing, in schooling, in employment, in the military, in a variety of ways. So, we have only had about 50 or 60 years of, quote, equality. But every single one of those 50 or 60 years has been with a fight, with attempts to restrict Black people's access to vote, to enact more strict war on drug policies that would ensnare more people in the criminal justice system, and rendering their citizenship rights, especially their voting rights, moot at this point. So like, to me, the media doesn't have to sensationalize race, and I don't think that they even do it good or even do it in the right way. Statistics is our friend here. History is our friend, to demonstrate that racism is still very much alive and well, and that it's really a continuation, albeit perhaps in a different form, but the essence remains the same, of making sure that fewer opportunities are presented or available for communities of color, and that white wealth and white freedoms continue to advance unabated.
Well, I don't know that white wealth is advancing unabated in certain sectors. I think the rise of Trump is mainly attributed to the neoliberal policies of the Clinton years and shipping jobs overseas and all this other stuff that gave rise to Trump among certain sectors of the populace who felt that they were their interests weren't being looked after. And look, say what you want about Trump, but somehow he did it, and he came a lot closer to doing it again than I think any of my friends imagined. And I don't think it was because of white supremacy. I think it was because of other stuff. But look, and to those who are commenting, there is another podcast. This is actually kind of part two. I didn't see anything specific right now. I'm just saying, Kim and I talked a lot about housing inequities and property ownership, and the ability for certain communities to accumulate wealth, and what the harmful practices of redlining and racism, and how that has created a need for economic justice. What I'm not sure is that we come into agreement as to, I see the economic justice as the priority to raise or create more opportunity. And I'm not sure that even as quickly as this country moves in this sort of rapid, high-speed spans of attentions that we had, I'm not sure that things are always changing, and I'm not sure that the characterization, because the Southern Poverty Law Center said this as well. They said that they characterized January the 6th as an insurrection to maintain white supremacy. Mm-hmm. I was there. I was listening to people. I saw people of different ethnicities, and a lot of people were constant. The main organizer, Ali Alexander, isn't white. And I saw a lot of people talking about Constitution, about big tech, not wanting to be censored, not wanting to lose their voices. I heard a lot of people talking about the mass media and the demonization of what they felt their demographic was. COVID overreach, and yes, some suspicion of government overreach and and constitutionality. But what never was mentioned, and I sat down with three guys who were also at the Capitol, three young guys, much younger than me, they're in their 20s, and we had a round table. And one of them said something interesting. Ford Fisher said, yes, you can say that there were white nationalists or white supremacists among that crowd, but you'd be hard pressed to make the argument that they were the ones who were organizing or pushing, the insurrection of January the 6th. And we compared notes, and there's a lot that came out in the press that, for example, nobody had guns. No guns made it into the Capitol. There was a lot armed insurrection.
I would venture to, I would disagree with that, because there was a lot of people who were arrested with guns that day. Right. And I think the reason why we did not see the U.S. Capitol Police pull their weapons on that crowd, because they knew that there was a lot of guns in that crowd. They knew it.
They weren't in the actual crowd. And me and the three other reporters, we said, did you see any guns? Well, I was there. I'm just telling you what I saw.
It's extremely illegal, number one, to have an unregistered firearm in the District of Columbia. They would be really dumb to be brandishing openly.
Right.
And so just because they weren't brandishing don't mean that the guns weren't there.
Well, this is what I know of the actual arrests, and I've studied the arrests. There were 6 gun arrests overall. 3 of them took place a mile away towards the Ellipse and Black Lives Matter Plaza. So that leaves only 3 gun arrests that took place at the Capitol. 2 of them were by Capitol Police, and they were on the Supreme Court side. One of them was a guy returning to his car, and he was armed. He had a sidearm, and he also had guns in his car. And I think the second arrest by Capitol Police was similar. And then one is marked Metropolitan Police Department as Capitol Visitor Center. So I have pressed both of these agencies and said, please tell me, did any gun make it into the Capitol? Now, you might say, what I think it's actually remarkably low considering that demographic. But also, Jeremy, because on January the 14th, on November the 14th, where I played the video, you actually had more gun arrests that day of people showing up to Freedom Plaza for Million MAGA March 1.
That's right. But did you notice on January 6th, there weren't a lot of arrests, period, right? Most of the arrests that have come as a result of the insurrection have come way after the fact, right? They've come because the FBI has been doing facial recognition and accepting tips, and people getting
close to 300 now. 300
exactly.
people. Yeah.
So I'm not very impressed with your arrest numbers that there weren't a lot of guns, because there were not a lot of people arrested. If any, how many people were actually arrested for being in the Capitol on January 6th? How many people were arrested there?
300 of the roughly 800, but it keeps growing.
They weren't arrested that same day. I don't think there were 300 arrests made on January 6th.
Not that same day.
Right, exactly.
But it's the same reason you couldn't arrest people at the Minneapolis police precinct that day. The mob overpowered. When you have a populist mob that overpowers the social contract, as it were, they rip up the social contract. When you're up on risers, there were times where people were very close to falling off, and they were trying to take measured crowd control steps. But you had you had a Coachella-size music festival crowd that was pushing up on the people at the spearhead, who are the extremists. It's very similar to Minneapolis police precinct at the end of May, because You have people, I have video of,
I mean, we can't listen. We can't compare a police precinct to the U.S. Capitol. Let's not even do that, because those things are not the same.
Well, they're not the same.
There was not a $500 million police force in place to protect that police precinct in Minneapolis as there is in place to the U.S. Capitol.
Well, look, on scale, no, they're not comparable. Period. No, but the same phenomenon is at play, which is you have a crowd, a critical mass that cannot be contained. And it becomes more dangerous the more you deploy tear gas, just like policing if we can't compare that, maybe we can compare the federal buildings in Oregon, in Portland, where the federal court was, where the Antifa in the Pacific Northwest is very advanced in how they move tactically and on how they, whether it was launching fireworks or lighting fires within certain places. There were.
Sorry, I'm reading the comments and I'm like, these people are kind of making some nonsensical comments here. I mean, like,
haven't get it.
Let me just say this, okay? I mean, I just want to push back against what you said about not a lot of guns being found amongst the insurrectionists. We have actually no idea, because there was so few arrests being made. Now, why there were fewer arrests being made, I don't disagree with what you're saying about, the crowd overwhelmed the police. But I would definitely say that had the crowd demographics been reversed, somehow the police would have found a way to maintain crowd control. If that had been Black Lives Matter, or if that had been a gathering of Muslims who came by the thousands to the U.S. Capitol to protest. Like, trust me, ways would have been discovered for police to control those crowds. But I can't agree with you that there weren't a lot of guns, because
in 2021,
I'm sorry?
In 2021, post Black Lives Matter 220 George Floyd protest, this time right now, a crowd of that magnitude that was made up of people of color. I think, again, this is where I think we're getting into comparing crowds from years ago with right now.
Oh, we can compare them right now. I mean, because I mean, there was lots of footage of the demonstrations while Trump was still in office in 2020, late 2020, where there was a U.S. military helicopter hovering, like flying low, like he was in Fallujah, above crowds protesting in Washington, D.C. The mayor in D.C., Muriel Bowser, allegedly had outlawed the use of chemical munitions. Too bad nobody told Metropolitan Police, because they tear gassed and pepperballed the hell out of Black Lives Matter protesters. But again,
you're talking about the first week of June specifically.
I mean, really throughout the summer, because there were some local incidents here where a young man, I can't remember if he was 18 or 20. Long story short, he was being harassed and followed by Metropolitan Police while on an e-scooter. He was allegedly driving the scooter on the sidewalk while being pursued by police. He crashed the scooter, ended up dying. And allegedly Metropolitan Police were very cagey and not very forthcoming with the details of this young man's death. And there was a number of protests at the local precinct. I believe it was the 4th precinct in DC, around that. And those crowds were tear gassed. So, that is a regular tactic employed by Metropolitan Police, which is why so many local DC activists and organizers were shocked that they must have left all their tear gas at home when the January 6th insurrectionists came. Like, where are all these munitions that we routinely see engaged against Black and brown demonstrators? They just couldn't find them, I guess, when Trump supporters showed up. So
I did get tear gassed, and it was Virginia State Police that when I was covering in the 4 p.m. hour, I was tear gassed.
Whereabouts were you? Because I mean, by that time, the siege had been ongoing for at least a couple hours.
Sure. Yeah, it started in the 1 p.m. hour. It actually started at 12:53 p.m. They were caught flat-footed is the other thing. I mean, that's because I didn't even bring my gas mask, because we expected the street violence to happen at night. We expected it to happen at night around Black Lives Matter Plaza. So there are other factors, but that talking point that you bring up, Chuck Modi, who is you know very well, and a local who is a leftist reporter, he
Chuck
brought
Modiano.
that. Yeah, that's his Twitter. But yeah, Modiano. And so he was tweeting that But he wasn't alone in that. There were other activist accounts that were cherry picking video of people, of the police giving up, and then those images were becoming viral, along with a talking point. As Robert Evans from the who I had followed his work up at the Pacific Northwest back in August, he tweeted, "If this were Black people or people, I think he said people of color, they would have been shot out with live rounds." He tweeted that 15 minutes before Ashley Babbitt was shot and killed with a live round. So I'm just saying that the outrage machine is already churning before anyone has a chance to ask what happened, who was there. Already the narratives come from Twitter. They make their way into tabloid form, and we're screaming at each other months later.
Well, yeah, well, I would also say though, Jeremy, I mean, and I don't condone the use of violence by police really against anybody, but if Ashley Babbitt didn't have an expectation that police would shoot at her, I mean, woo, the levels of delusion. Like, you were inside the U.S. Capitol. That in itself is a federal crime if you were breaching the Capitol and not supposed to be there in any way. And the fact that she just knew that no harm would come to her, you know, that's on her. You know what I mean? Like that, unfortunately, I've seen Black people killed for much, much, much less. And they weren't breaching the U.S. Capitol building, and they weren't threatening the lives of lawmakers.
Well, yeah, and I mean the same can be said in the Pacific Northwest, with a mostly white crowd of anarchists that went after the federal building and breached the courthouse and so forth. So there's one thing I want to bring up. Now, I do enjoy this discussion. I hope that people understand that we have different points of view, but this is an amicable, as our last discussion was, and you can go back and listen to talking about housing and, in my opinion, the need to. I think we can agree more on economic justice than what I have seen. In other words, when everything is presented through the lens of race, is I see things getting worse. I see things getting worse in the street, online, and I think I wonder if we could refocus our efforts to economic justice that people can agree on, which is, to allow. I talked about subsidized homeownership, that down payments are the number one. That it's hard to just have tens of thousands of dollars laying around in this economy. Which when you discussed race at one point earlier, I was thinking of it in terms of Bernie Sanders. I was like, well, what you're talking about is the top 1% and the bottom 99%. And that's what this sounds to me to be more of a something that we can all move on and make progress on. And there are times where I'm not sure that it all comes down to race.
I would ask you, if you could, if you wouldn't mind, can you just tell me the point in time in American history where it was not about race?
The time that look, I mean, I know what you're saying. But do you though? Because if you were to ask me, how can we stop, or why do we constantly view things, different issues through the prism of race? It's because this is America, right? Like, right. There was never this non-racist society that I think a lot of people have convinced themselves that at some point it used to be, or that there was just period. If we could just go back to where race didn't matter. Well, when did race did not matter? To tell me so I can know. so I mean, from my perspective is going to be different, but I see my parents' generation as having more opportunity to get into homeownership. And I think I said this before. And I have relatives that are Japanese American who were born in camps so if you want to talk about when it's about race in World War II, they were removed, not because there was any evidence of them
because they were Japanese.
Because they were Japanese. That was enough. And their land was taken.
That's right.
It was resold.
That's right.
And when they
plunder, that's what we call plunder. We call it, the government plundered the assets of Japanese people, of Japanese Americans.
They did. They
shameful.
absolutely did, and they took everything. And it's interesting because it was Japanese Internment Remembrance Day just the other week, and I saw a lot of people posting about it who weren't Japanese, and I you sort of have that. Oh, okay, and that's fine. And that's fine. But there's another part of this story, which is now a lot of them, when they got out after the war, they went to the East Coast or to Chicago because they were not welcome back on the West Coast.
That's right.
And so for many years, they didn't come back to California. But when they did, they didn't have their property anymore. The system still allowed those who wanted to look at adversity and confront it and get into UC Berkeley or get into UCLA, as relatives of mine did. And it didn't cost a fortune to go to college, and you wouldn't be strapped with student loan debt. And you could get into into homeownership, so that by the time I think Reagan signed the apology and the reparation, which I think was a $10,000 check, but by that time, when people in the 90s in the Japanese American community got that, they already had their own homes. And the reason was because the system worked better then. And that's why I keep going back to the Bernie Sanders thing and to how the populace has been priced out of opportunity.
Absolutely.
In a way that I think we can, and I'm not saying let's not talk about race. I actually come from a theater background. My background, I did journalism and theater arts side by side since I was a teenager. And so journalism, I would study other issues and sometimes culture, but theater and expression and coming to understand each other and each other's stories, I think is better suited for the arts than it necessarily is to politics. That doesn't mean that there shouldn't be political concerns for different groups and minorities. But what I do think is that we'll make more progress if we get to the common points as opposed to fixating on the what divides us and what will maybe always divide us. Because if I try to answer that question, when is racism going to be gone? It's an absurd question because it will never be. In some ways we will be different as human beings have been for thousands of years. And
differences is one thing, but systematically oppressing people based on those differences is the definition of racism. And I don't see how we can divorce ourselves from these conversations until the issue is actually corrected. I think economics is a good starting point, but that the compromise on economic equality is reparations, and that is such a non-starter for so many people. But we can't have a honest reckoning of what was taken from Black people over the course of hundreds of years here on this continent. Let me make that clear, because a lot of people tell me, oh, well, slavery was everywhere. There was slavery around the world. That's fine. I know that. I'm well aware that slavery is not uniquely an American institution, but we're talking about America, right? We're talking about the history of this nation since and before 1776. And if the conversation around reparations is a non-starter, then I don't see how we can piecemeal, bring economic justice to Black communities. And let me absolutely not leave out Indigenous communities as well. I mean, you want to talk about literally having the land stolen from underneath you. Even now to this day, the issue happening with Oak Flat and the Apache people and Rio Tinto trying to strip mine all the copper from an Apache sacred site. It always seems as though the rights of people of color in America are always negotiable, right? They're always available to be compromised or be on the chopping block. And, until we're ready to have those conversations and understand that Black people mentioning racism and talking about racism and describing the ways in which racism has not only impacted their lives, but the lives of their ancestors and their children, like it's a frustrating thing, because like we can't just poo-poo race. Like we can't be like, oh, I know racism exists, but no, there is no but. Like if we know it exists, how can we resolve it? And most importantly, the people that are wielding the power in the racism equation, number one, need to acknowledge that they do have that power. And second of all, have to understand that it is the work of white people. If white people are bothered by racism and don't want to live in a racist society, then I need the white people to step up and do the work that is necessary in order to eradicate that. Even if that means as something as small as checking your friends and your family members, right? If people start talking racist, crazy, not just about Black people, but about, indigenous, Asian, Latinx people, check them. Like, just don't let that slide. Don't be like, oh man, here goes Jim again, complaining about the N-words. You know what I mean? Like, don't let that ride. Because that, if you want to talk about how to eradicate racism, it happens one conversation amongst white people at a time, because I can talk until I'm blue in the face and explain all the ways that I have experienced racism, explain the ways in which my parents and grandparents experienced racism in ways that would outright terrify you, things that I can't even conceptualize. But if people think that we're exaggerating, right? Oh, you guys are making it worse. Oh, people have been free. Okay, but people have also been living under deliberate systems to keep them out of jobs, to keep them out of good schools, to keep them out of safe communities. Those things, they compound each other, right? And so if you have one or two generations that maybe didn't have access to good quality school systems, how can you expect generation 3 to go to college, right? Like that's a lot of pulling up by your bootstraps that other communities who have not experienced the same kinds of oppression that Black people have. I'm so glad that you brought up, Japanese Americans who were interred. The big difference is that they were able to reunite with their families. Like their family unit was never decimated over a sustained period of time. I mean, just think about this for a moment. I mean, think about 10 generations of Black people in America who had their children sold away from them, who had their parents sold away from them. And then all of a sudden in the 20th century, people just expect Black people to all of a sudden have it together in terms of this family unit, and not even to get into some of the policies of, Lyndon B. Johnson's War on Poverty, where Black mothers who were receiving welfare benefits could not have the fathers live in the house with them. I mean, that was part of being able to receive the benefits, right? But there was no job for the Black father to go and support the family. So, I mean, it was a lot of this was compounded by different versions of social engineering, right? To keep the Black family, Black people in America in disarray in many, many ways, economics being one of them. So we just have to consider these things, right? Like consider, like Ta-Nehisi Coates said this once at a talk I went to. He said, imagine being that generation of Black people in America where there was 5 generations of slavery behind you and 5 generations of slavery in front of you. And that stuck with me for a long time, because there's really not any other group, perhaps besides Indigenous Americans, who has had that same experience. And when you think about how that, in fact, just think about how substance abuse or abuse, period, impacts people generation to generation to generation. Slavery, for God's like, can you imagine? Can you imagine being in the middle of slavery where nothing but slaves behind you, nothing but slavery in front of you? And yet somehow we are expected to perform at the same level as people who never had to endure such things. So please just keep that in mind. Thank you.
No, thank you as well. I think this comment's kind of interesting because it says fixed class issues and race issues will follow. Making it all about identity will only divide us. Systematic racism is real. Now that's a kind of unexpected conclusion it's an unexpected conclusion to what the person started with, the happy camel started with in their statement, which is that the class issues, and if we address them in economic justice, that the race issues, that there will be some sort of help with that, but also understanding that there are there is a history and that systemic racism is real. I think that's an interesting comment.
It is an interesting comment. I mean, unfortunately, it's a vicious cycle because yeah, probably if you fix the class issues, the race issue, quote unquote, could be resolved. But the problem is the class issues exist because of the race issue, right? Like the reason that there are historically Black colleges and universities is because Black students were forbidden from attending white schools. I mean, one of the greatest tragedies of where I live locally is that Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall was not allowed to attend the University of Maryland Law School. Why? Because he was Black. That's why he attended Howard University Law School, because where else was he going to go? Right. And there has been, a reason that separate but unequal has existed because we have been denied access to the equal for a long time. And even though it doesn't happen in the same way that for example, the desegregation of public schools like Brown, Linda Brown in Topeka, Kansas, and the Little Rock Nine in Little Rock, Arkansas, the reason we don't need the National Guard to escort in Black children into all white schools anymore is because the schools are no more segregated now than they were in the 1950s. And a lot of that, as you said, Jeremy, has to do with economics. But again, the root of that is race. And again, you have to understand like how specific like American racism is. Like we almost can't point to other places and be like, oh, well, they're racist too. Yeah, they might be racist too, but there's a very specific like brand of racism that exists here in America. And it's so systemic and it goes back hundreds of years, but it permeates almost every single corner of Black life and Indigenous life and Latinx life, that I wish more white people would broaden their perspective to understand that and just don't be like, oh, well, the reason the police are after them is because they're criminals. No, like, honey, there's a lot of coke being snorted in your neighborhood, okay? Like the police just don't come and kick in your door. Like that's the difference. Like it's not so much that the drugs are there. The drugs are everywhere, right? But only the law enforcement response is targeted towards the communities that they want to be continually to be oppressed.
And I think that's an interesting point to look at, because I do have some statistics, and I think it's important to keep that at the forefront when we do look at them. But somebody is asking about violence, and that, yes, condemn racism, check people, but that doesn't mean endorse, people getting punched in the face. And one person says, but do you condemn violence? I mean how
can I not condemn it? I mean, in the sense that when I say not condemn it, what I mean is I just think about all the violence that Black communities have experienced historically and continue to experience. And I don't understand how the power structure that has waged a lot of the violence on these communities, like how can you not expect it in return, right? Like even if it's on a micro level where, a white person says a racial slur to a Black person and they punch you in the face, you understand for a long time, like you would die for that. Like, I think in some ways people are reveling in this freedom. Like, we do live in a different time. You can punch racists in the face now and not worry about the Klan showing up to your house to burn a cross in your yard and demand that you come outside or, commit some other sort of violence against you that is going to, be potentially deadly for you and your family. So, I mean, no, I don't feel nothing about racists or people who support racist systems. It doesn't bother me if violence comes to them, because I just know how much violence that Black communities and Indigenous communities have experienced and continue to experience. So, you can't not expect it. If it comes, it's karma. That's how I see it.
Unless it's not, and that's
but when has it not been? Like I need to like.
Well, I've been punched in the face on a sidewalk, and
by who?
There was no reason.
By who?
All right, so I was leaving a comedy club in New York City on 23rd Street, walking towards Chelsea, and I'm by myself, and this group of guys. 5 dudes there was an urban underground club on 23rd, and they all came out and they were in tank tops and they're kind of waving around, and the guy's coming right at me. And it's that thing of, okay, who's going to move? Bam. and I just got punched in the face. And it was at the time they were talking.
Sorry that happened to you.
Why did that happen to me?
Well, I said, I'm sorry that happened to you.
Sorry that happened. Yeah, no, I mean, it sucked. But the thing is that random acts of violence, this is why I'm against all violence. It's because violence begets violence. Now that aggression was directed at a total stranger, at an innocent. And someone might have been able to rationalize it or conceptualize it. Well, this person's part of a racist system or so forth. Or maybe it's not that at all.
No.
Maybe it's just violence for violence. But
I'm talking specific. The instances I'm talking about are these amazing videos that you will see pop up from time to time, where there is a verbal altercation, usually between a white person and a black person, and the white person will use a racial slur, and then they get punched. I'm not talking. I mean, look, you weren't using racial slurs towards these people that hit you, right?
No.
It was, I mean, so we're not talking about the same thing. I mean, that is random, but what you're talking about is unprovoked. I'm talking about provoked,
right,
with provocation by using a racial slur towards somebody that you don't know otherwise, right?
Sure. I mean, and I would say that those are not the majority of situations that make up. I do want to show you a couple of statistics and get your take on that.
Sure.
This might take like 3 or so minutes, and then but these are some interesting statistics that here. Let me see if I can pull up the screen here. That's the. You know what I was looking at the case of Elijah McClain in Denver, and this is a study that came out that there was no legal basis whatsoever for the detention that led to his death. For people who don't know, Elijah McClain was a cellist. He was a massage therapist, a young man in his early 20s. He was detained by police with no legal basis. He had a sort of panic attack, and they administered ketamine, and it killed him. And I've been to Denver only a couple of times, and I've sort of been in documenting a little in that community. And but I don't know why this story isn't more widely known. What's interesting to me is what cases end up getting more attention than others. And I had the same reaction back in 2014. In terms of Eric Gardner, I was in New York at that time when I remember doing a couple stories that was on Staten Island in New York. And then yet in St. Louis with Michael Brown, that's where the majority of the civil unrest was. Now, we could talk about that later. It just happened to come up here. Here are some statistics, tab to tab here. Rates of white on white, black on black homicide are similar, 80 to 90%. This is older information, but I don't think it's changed. If anybody has more information, they can present it between 1980, 2008. Department of Justice found that 84% of white victims were killed by white offenders. That would mean 16% were killed by people of color. 93% of black victims were killed by black offenders. So 7% were non-black. I think this is interesting because these statistics came out last year when false memes were being spread from the right that tried to make it seem that that there was this huge disparity and so forth. Numbers are pretty consistent year to year. This is
that's what. But not to cut you off there, Jeremy.
Yeah.
I mean, when we look at crime generally, at least along some of these statistics, I mean, that is what we find. Violent crimes are committed intra-racially, right?
Yeah.
People who are victims of sex assault are usually assaulted by somebody of the same race. Like this stuff is not it's not new, but it's extremely relevant in the sense that so many times these crime statistics numbers are used to distort, especially to frame Black and brown people in a negative light. But when we look at drug use, when we look at murders, as you're doing now, a lot of these numbers are quite the same. So it begs the question, then why are communities of color so much over policed? If Black and white people kill each other at the same rates, if Black and white people use drugs at relatively the same rates, then why is it that Black neighborhoods have you can find a cop everywhere, right? And these are questions again that I hope the majority interrogate themselves with. Ask yourself this question: But I'm sorry, I didn't
Sure.
mean to cut you off. Okay.
No. Sure. No, I welcome it, because also, when you look at the numbers here, the disparity that 13% of the population is represented by African Americans. And here we see that Black deaths among murder victims is all the way up at 7,000 compared to, 5,700 for white people. And, we have a situation. This is a Time magazine article that said that over 19,000 people were killed in shooting and firearms related incidents in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
That is a big increase. And I think this should play into police reform / defunding police discussions, whether it's training and what practical measures will get us out of this situation. This is the number of homicides, firearms year to year, 2006. Now to 2019, you had 10,000, but it stays pretty consistent. Sure, in 2003, 2004, there's a dip down to more like 8,000, and then it gets higher in 2017. This is interesting, though. This was, I think it came from, what was his profile? But it was what is that one? The 538. I think this analyst is involved with that statistical outfit. But this shows the change in murder data city by city. And
I'm sorry, I was looking at Stephen Horn's comment. That made me sniggle.
Sorry. But no, I can't see the comments right now as I'm on this. So basically what we see here, I mean, when you look at Chicago, if you had 450 murders in 2019, this is before 2020 is even over, and you're already pushing 700. And this data again was compiled in November. And so we've had these explosion of murders in some cities. 47%, and in bigger cities like Los Angeles as 24%, in Milwaukee, 100% from 85 to 172. So Minneapolis, which, just this weekend I was talking about, there was a shooting at George Floyd Square where someone was killed, and there were, I think, 3 shootings overall, and you're going from 40 to 73. So there's been this increase. I just want to take it back to, because I had said that the left imagines thousands are being killed by police, people of color are being killed by police, and it's actually only 1,000 police deaths a year. And this is how they're divided. White people died the blue is 2017, and the red is 2020. And I just want to present this sort of dryly and factually for us to look at, which is that you have about, 40%, the majority of deaths, people killed by police, are white people. Now, naturally, they make up 70% of the population. So it would figure, as Black people make up 13% of the population, that whites would be the majority killed by police. But disproportionately, Black people, is making up 13% of the population, are close to twice the percentage rate of what they make, of how they make up the population at 23. And you see that Hispanic deaths are recorded there. But that's year to year from 2017 rather, is the blue, and 2020 is the red. And it stays pretty consistent year to year. Obviously, we want all these numbers to come down as low as possible, but it does shed some light, I think, onto some media distortion on how big. Again, they did a study, and folks on the left thought that the deaths of people of color were in the thousands from police. This is what was this? This was homicides between 1980 and 2008. We talked about this a little. Victims, white and Black. I mean, again, this is disproportionate, and I don't intend to say or imply anything from this. I just want us to look at it. This is the percentage of offenders in homicides. Over half are African American, and there's a percentage listed there for white. So obviously, with how this makes up our society in the United States with its disproportionate representation in categories where none of us want to be
Right.
represented, and we want to get this down. Now, this is hate crime statistics from the FBI. Most of them are assaults. It's interesting. I told that little anecdote of where I got, punched in the face. At the time, there were these rumors, which I didn't think were rumors after I got punched in the face, of a knockout game where people would knock somebody out, just watch them out, and it was a game. And people on my Facebook feed were saying that's BS, that's some racist bullshit, and I was like, oh, I just got punched in the face, just FYI. But anyways, half of these hate crimes that were recorded by the FBI are assaults. Of the 6,406 known offenders, 52% were white, 23% were black. Other races recounting remain as far as the remaining offenders. So again, these are the same disproportionate numbers that we've seen in other statistics. Last time, this is the shooting of Daniel Shaver. This man was killed. I'm not going to go into it, but he was killed. The body cam footage is, the LA Times put it out. You could see there. It's disturbing to watch, but it's one of these, as all of these killings are. And I bring these up because there are these incidents that in our last conversation, I didn't have at the top of my head, but the killing of Tony Timpa is another situation where he's restrained. And these are people who are not people of color. Interestingly enough, the shooting of Duncan Lemp has been taken up by the Boogaloo movement, and that's like a whole other can of worms I don't even want to get into right now.
I mean, listen, let me tell you something. The issue of police violence, it is more historically and even modern day. I'd say it's more impactful to the Black communities. I understand the statistics you just rolled out, but again, like, white people have generally not been policed in the same way. Even with that being said, white people need to take to the streets and say these people's names. Like this idea that the way that American policing is just fine and it's just okay, and if you just comply, then you shouldn't die. Well, no, that's not always the case. Police are not trained well. If we look at the statistics about the way that crime is solved in this country, police spend very little time investigating and or solving violent crimes. Most of police time actually is done doing things like traffic stops and just doing a lot of sitting around, eating up overtime. So no, the system of American policing is not doing a good job, period. Except for the fact that, there are some white people that end up dying at the hands of cops, and people will ask, well, why isn't a bigger deal being made? Yes, white community, I would ask you, why are you not making a bigger deal of this? You were totally justified to do that. You would probably find a great amount of allyship amongst communities of color who also do not care for, nor do we feel is acceptable for this rate of police violence to go on in our communities. So I am very sorry for the white families that have lost people to police violence. There's even one here in Montgomery County, Maryland. Unfortunately, I can't recall the gentleman's name, but there was a basically botched police raid in the early morning hours of Montgomery County. And I saw the police make up all these ridiculous narratives as to why this young white man lost his life while asleep in his own house. And it was a very similar way to how they try to discredit Black victims of police violence. They said that he had guns in the house, which was true, but the guns were not in access to him. Like they were not like under his bed or anything. They were in a whole separate part of the house. But that didn't stop the police from, putting out the narrative that he had guns in the house. And a variety of different sort of, very tired tropes relating to either possessing guns or possessing drugs, as if that is some sort of justification for the police to kill you. So I think that white America, white communities also need to reassess the way that policing is done. But the problem is, the reason why they don't is because more often than not, the police are there to serve their will, right? White people, not all, but they most know that they can sort of treat police like as customer service, right? If there's a person of color that is somehow bothering you, or you are being bothered by that person, you can call the police and they will deal with that. And I appreciate you bringing up the story of Elijah McClain, because that's exactly what happened to Elijah McClain in Aurora, Colorado. The other part of the story, that part of the reason why Elijah even had the encounter with police in the first place, is because he was wearing a full face mask. He wore a full face mask to the store, like not even to like the grocery store, to like the 7-Eleven, to go get some snacks and some drinks. And because he had on this full face mask, and the reason he was wearing it is because he was anemic, and it's Colorado, so he was cold, and someone called the police on him because he was walking down the street wearing this full face mask, and that looks suspicious. And a Black person who looks suspicious is reason enough for police to do an encounter. And as we saw what happened with Elijah McClain, it turned deadly for him. And the fact that they injected him with ketamine is absolutely, I agree with you, Jeremy, is something that people should be making a huge deal out of. But come to find out, a reporting couple who I'm friends with, Taya Graham and Stephen Janis, they host a show called the Police Accountability Report. They did a whole story about how the use of ketamine, specifically in Colorado by law enforcement, is not an uncommon practice, which should terrify a lot of people, because ketamine is a very, very powerful drug, and you could have an allergy to ketamine and not even know it. Most importantly, the police have no idea what you were allergic to. So why would they themselves or allow the medics to inject someone with a very dangerous substance as part of their policing duties? That is terrifying. But yeah.
And the attitudes are terrifying as well, because when there is a picture of officers that made a joke that they were and they lost their jobs because they made a pose like that. Now, it's not exclusive to, one of the videos that I mentioned was the Tony Tippa video. Mm-hmm. In that video, as he's dying, they make some jokes in that, and that's a white victim. So there's, look, we need policing reform. I see one comment is asking about the difference between improve the police and burn it down, defund it, abolish it. Is there, there's so much of the left movement, right? The leftist movement that is about precisely abolition and starting over from nothing. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what that is that one starts over with. And certainly the in Minneapolis is sort of a case study. They said, the city council said, yes, we are going to abolish the police. Mm-hmm. And then they walked it back as crime statistics jumped. And as I referenced the shooting in the no-go zone, the area, the autonomous zone, rather, of a 2.5 block radius or so around Cup Food, where George Floyd died.
I'm glad you brought that up, because what's interesting to me about some of these crime statistics jumping, especially in the wake of all the uprisings that happened last year and the movement around defund, abolish the police. Let's be clear, like 99% of these municipality budgets have not yet been approved, right? So by and large, I mean, and let's start it back from last year. When calls for defund the police were coming from the streets, they had not reached City Hall yet, right? They had not reached the desks of the city council and the people who approve annual budgets. So no police had been defunded, and yet the crime went up. Why is that? Because the police were in their little feelings. Wah, wah, wah. Why is everyone being so mean to us? Well, everyone's being so mean to us. We're just going to stop working. We're just gonna let things happen. We'll let things play out. Okay. Well, if you guys are so deep in your feelings behind people wanting accountability from you, civil servants, taxpayer funded individuals, then maybe this isn't the job for you. If you're that easily offended, maybe cop is not what you should be doing. Maybe you should be doing something a little bit more suited to your sensibilities. And then that's bothersome. Because that just goes to show you that, number one, police wield way too much power in our cities, right? Fraternal orders of police unions wield way too much political power in Democrat-controlled cities and Republican-controlled areas. And we have to ask ourselves, why are the police entitled to so much public funds relative to the amount of crime that is A, being committed, and crimes that are also B, being solved or unsolved? Especially when we look at how much public schools and public health has been defunded over the decades, generationally, really. And yet police budgets continue to increase. And even in this era of quote unquote police accountability, we're still seeing the police budgets increase. Even an agency like the U.S. Capitol Police, who had an epic failure, like they had one job, protect the U.S. Capitol, and they failed to do so. And now they have asked Congress for an additional $100 million after receiving a $50 million bump in last year's budget, bringing their grand total operating budget to about $500 million, which is absurd. Absurd. So I don't see how people get to be bad at their jobs and yet keep getting their funding increased.
I don't know, especially when you talk about the unions and certain, fraternal organizations, that you have as many people against that as you might think. I think there's conservatives who believe that there is the trick is to the desire is to have better trained police and better. There's a lot we can do, I think, if we just if we get beyond the division and the political moves and the finger pointing. I think there is more we can do and I think I would encourage sort of anybody that's in this podcast and who's had a emotional comment here and sort of the overall theme of everything that I've experienced in 8 to 9 months being on the road is what happens when our political passions get so ahead of ourselves that we're just scoring points in this ecosystem that we live in now, which is Twitter and the internet. When the more emotional we are, the more we cry out, and the more it's incentivized in some way. Is there a way we can have more conversations like this? I enjoyed this conversation very much, and the points, and I enjoyed disagreeing with you on things. And I mean, certainly when it comes to nonviolence, that's where I plant a lot of what I believe in, because I see it as cyclical, and maybe it's as simple as seeing Romeo and Juliet when I was young and learning at an early age that violence begets violence. And so I'm very outspoken when it comes to that issue, but there's more that I think we can see as far as a path towards police reform, meaningful police reform, because you make a good point, which is exploding budgets. I mean, I just see the fencing that's up in Minneapolis and up in Washington, D.C. right now. And we're creating these sort of public space, it looks like a prison with razor wire and so forth, and we're fencing ourselves out as opposed to trying to find our way to what the common ground solutions. And police reform is something that I think can be addressed if you get down to exactly the particulars that you just expressed, the unions having too much power, qualified immunity, all of these other issues that I think if we have real discussions on. There's a good podcast I mentioned the last time we spoke. It's a This American Life 2-part series called Please See It Differently. And it tells 2 very different scenarios. One in Miami of Hawaiian Gardens, where a young man of color who was working at a corner store was actually arrested dozens of times while he was working at the corner store. And it's a mind-blowing story on This American Life about what happens when policies of zero tolerance policies come in and go awry. Mm-hmm. And we certainly don't want anything like that.
No, listen, and that is a bipartisan thing. And this is why I'm very clear on my program that I don't have a political party affiliation. I'm actually in search of a political party home right now, but I know it does not lie with the Republicans nor the Democrats, because they are in lockstep on this issue. Democrats, by and large, are not opposed to defunding the police. I mean, people can sort of cherry pick, comments from like AOC or Jamal Bowman or, Cori Bush, people who are honestly some of my favorite politicians. I wish they represented where I live, but they do not. I'm represented by centrist Democrats and they suck. But Democrats, you talk about the policy of zero policing. That was a Martin O'Malley initiative. I mean, and people in Baltimore City still hate Martin O'Malley to this day for those draconian law, like broken windows policing. Like, it was
Zero tolerance,
outrageous.
yeah.
I mean, 100,000 people in 1 year while Martin O'Malley was mayor of Baltimore were either stopped and frisked or arrested by Baltimore police, which is like a ridiculously high number of the population. Many people were stopped and frisked and or arrested or questioned numerous times, like the young man you're talking about in this story, in This American Life. And we have to understand, you know, the reason why people are saying abolish the police as opposed to reform the police is because how can you reform a system when they're doing what they're supposed to do? Now, you and I, like, would be common sense people, be like, hey, you know, how is it in the police's purview, or how does it even serve them as officers to engage a young man who's working, clearly working, has a job, has a, you know, at the location or whatever? Why do they bother him so much? Like, how does that advance? But because the whole point is to catch him doing something, right? The whole point is to ensnare him somehow, some way in the system, which will have a negative impact on him for the rest of his life, even if he just gets an arrest. It is very hard to get even an arrest off your record, let alone an actual conviction. And we have to be clear about what police objectives are. And we don't like to think that police are there specifically to target certain communities, but they are, as they have been historically. I mean, I remember how much crap Colin Kaepernick got for even suggesting that the modern American policing is born out of slave patrols. He's right. I mean, it was. And again, I have to ask people, you know, point to me when that policy stopped. Like, when did people who were in a law enforcement capacity ever stop harassing Black people, asking them for their papers, asking them to prove who they are, asking them to prove that they're where they're supposed to be, where they're supposed to be there? I mean, this has never stopped. So how can you reform that? Like, how can you tell police to stop harassing Black people when that is explicitly what they are trained to do?
Well, because sometimes in some communities, and I think it appears in the same this American Life, it's a 2-part episode, and they talk about Milwaukee as well, and they even talk about how when police are called out, sometimes it's people of color calling the police in their own community to deal with the people who are the corner, you know, on the corner, and addressing issues. So sometimes it's the community that's calling.
Absolutely. And that's something I also say on my show. Please stop calling the police on Black people. I'm talking specifically to the members of my Black audience. Please, like, unless you are seriously like in danger, and even if you are in danger, that doesn't even necessarily mean that the police are going to show up and help you. They might mistake you for the perpetrator, and you call the police and they come and harm you in some way. That has happened far too many times for me to even count. So that's a possibility too. But Black people in general need to stop calling the police on each other, because it's dangerous. It's just flat out dangerous, especially those who are experiencing mental health crisis. That video of that 9-year-old girl in Rochester, New York, being pepper sprayed by police was so abhorrent and hurtful, and made even that much more hurtful to know that would never happen to a 9-year-old white girl.
Kim Brown, thank you for being on the show. And there's a
appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate the discussion. You know, there are a lot of comments that we didn't get to for better or for worse. You know, I appreciate everybody weighing in. I'm sorry that I couldn't. We were so locked in on these very intense topics that I didn't get to the comments as much. But I can see someone saying that they agree that they're politically homeless as well. And I certainly, that is something that we agree on, is the need for new political leadership and solutions and vision. And so certainly, whereas, you know, there are, I think, disagreements that we have in how we have seen certain things, I think we want the same thing. And I hope that more people can come to that understanding that a lot of us want the same thing. And we just got to figure out how to find more common ground. That's where I'll leave at least my stance for now.
When you say we want the same thing, listen, I have been told by, I assume, racists online to go back to Africa. And I'm like, yes, we do want the same thing. I too would love to go back to Africa. Why don't you contribute to my fund and help me get there? Because I mean, I've had it. I've truly had it with this country. It is not getting better. It is getting worse. Trump's election was proof positive of that. Trump's resurgence will be even more confirmation of that. And, you know, when the race for president was between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, I knew that no matter who won, I would be the loser. So there is that. But thank you so much, Jeremy, for having me on. I really appreciate this discussion, and it's given us, you know, an opportunity to sort of, you know, see things from each other's perspective, and to understand that, you know, I mean, in the long term, we all want peace. We all want to be able to raise our families here in this country, as the founding fathers foresaw. But you have to, I just want everybody to understand that the founding fathers did not foresee the same things for us all. And the sooner that we abandon this sort of myth and fairy tale of American exceptionalism, and actually view this country for what it is, but most importantly for what it could be, if it was just to stop being so damn racist, we could actually get a lot accomplished.
Well, I see it as, if you know, again, when it comes to property ownership and opportunity and making things work as future generations, I think generations coming up don't see themselves being granted a lot of opportunity. And I understand why people take to the streets and why people feel disenfranchised. So if we can find a way to do it, let's talk about it more.
Absolutely.
All right.
Thank you.
Kim Brown, where can people find you? That's your Twitter handle, and
yes,
you're also on your YouTube channel.
Yes. The YouTube channel is Burn It Down with Kim Brown. Our show tomorrow, we are going to be talking about what's happening in Haiti. And you want to talk about a struggle for democracy, please pay attention to what's happening in the streets of Haiti right now. Haiti is trying to oust its American-backed, you know, dictator / puppet. And the way that America continues to interfere in the affairs of foreign countries continues to be problematic. I mean, defund the police also needs to extend to defund the military, because we spend a lot of money destabilizing other people's nations. And we should really not do that, as we see there's so much that needs to be done here on the domestic front. So please tune in to Burn It Down with Kim Brown. We air live Tuesdays and Fridays on YouTube, 5 p.m. Eastern. We go live, as I said, so people are welcome to participate in the chat and engage in the conversation. And tomorrow we will be talking about what's happening in Haiti.
And folks, I'll be Wednesday with Brett Weinstein on this platform, and we'll be talking about Minneapolis and other things, other cultural issues. You know, we didn't talk too much about Minneapolis, and before we do leave, you know, I want to give some people some hope. I hope there is something that happened today is they delayed jury selection because they are trying to. A judge ruled that the appeals court ruled that the judge must relook at a third-degree murder charge as well. Chauvin is charged with second-degree murder, second-degree manslaughter, and then third-degree. Now, the difference is with third-degree murder charge is you don't have to prove intent to murder. And I wonder, you know, looking back, you know, the Trayvon Martin case was a situation where George Zimmerman walked because he was not charged with third-degree murder, which which in Florida, Pennsylvania, and Minnesota, the 3 states that still have a murder charge in which you don't have to show intent to kill, but you can be found guilty of third-degree murder. And so that's what they're looking at right now. Certainly back in Florida, you know, with Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman, I mean, that struck such an emotional chord for the country, and the way that people took sides in that was, I remember sort of just on the periphery trying to parse it. But that George Zimmerman wasn't also charged with third-degree murder made it so that they had to prove that he intended to kill, and that it wasn't. And his defense successfully was able to convince a jury that he did not intend to kill. So when it gets to some people in the comment section, I just noticed are saying that our conversation has been pretty bleak and kind of gloomy. And these are
Well.
tough topics. These are not easy topics. And now
we live in bleak times, y'all. I mean, there's not a lot of roses and sunshine here. I mean, we don't even talk about the climate crisis that we're in, right? You want to talk about bleak? Oh God, don't even talk about how most cities and municipalities stop recycling plastic. Like when I heard that, you want to talk about bleak, but I'm sorry, Jeremy. But what you're saying about.
But now we're talking about a city, Minneapolis, which is the most progressive city, one of the most progressive cities in the country. And so when it comes to us being able to look at what's going to happen next and have the conversations about, what the charges are. And again, if everything becomes a reaction through the lens of systematic racism, I don't know what can you tell us about your feelings with Minneapolis coming up? Look, everything that we've lived as the country has experienced since the end of May, certainly we must have known that this was around the corner and that there would be a reckoning in this trial coming up. The question is, what happens next? They don't even have the charges worked out.
Which should give you an idea as to how this is probably going to go. From what I understand, that they are fortifying downtown Minneapolis.
Spend $1 million on fencing.
Well, exactly. They wouldn't spend $1 million on fencing if they thought that he was going to be found guilty, right? They understand that there is a very good chance that Derek Chauvin and the rest of these cops who have been charged in George Floyd's murder could walk because, again, as I said earlier, Jeremy, it's only kind of recent that it's been against the law to murder a Black person and actually be held legally accountable for it. Make that double for law enforcement. And the only reason that I think there might be any kind of conviction possibly is because what Derek Chauvin did to George Floyd was caught on video. And had that not been caught on video, there may not have even been any charges filed. But and I can't even say that because I think about Eric Gardner in New York City, where he was killed, choked to death, plain view in the middle of the day, and someone did record it, and none of those officers were charged or convicted either. So, I understand that the criminal justice system is pretty much there to protect itself. Police are a very integral part of the criminal justice system, and big revenue generators, right? When you arrest people, there are fines and court costs and other such costs associated. I mean, the criminal justice system in this country is big business, and if for reasons that the police got defunded, or if certain crimes were deprioritized as being, crimes, then the system itself would lose out probably on hundreds of millions of dollars. But I'm not optimistic about this case. I'm trying to think of cases where police actually did go down for killing unarmed people, and the only two come to mind. South Carolina, Walter Scott, the Black man who ran from police and was shot in the back on video, and the police dropped a taser next to him and tried to say that that Mr. Scott took his taser and tried to assault him. That cop actually did get convicted. And the NYPD officers who raped and sodomized Abner Louima, and he died. And I think that at least one of them was convicted. Officer Justin Volpe, Volpe. That name kind of comes to mind for when it comes to that case. So, but more often than not, there aren't charges brought. If there are charges brought, the cops are acquitted. Freddie Gray in Baltimore. And so I think Minneapolis can expect to get tore up again this summer if Derek Chauvin is not convicted. So,
well, that's where the third degree murder charge comes in. And there is one other case that actually happened in Minneapolis in which a police officer was convicted. And that's the police officer named Mohammed Noor.
Oh, yes.
A Somali American.
That's right.
Who shot and killed a woman, I believe her name was Justine, and she was from Australia. And she came around to the police car, and she was shot and killed. And he was found, he got 25 years, or was it 12 and a half? Or no, I think it was 12 and a half. It was half of the, it was half of the, so third degree murder comes with a maximum sentence of 25, and he got half the time. He got 12 and a half. So the question is Derek Chauvin, if these third degree murder charges stick, then it's going to be much more likely that he could get 25 years for third degree. There's also second degree manslaughter. You'd have to talk to a lawyer from the state of Minnesota, as far as the intricacies of that. But the idea is that, if second degree does not hold, if they cannot prove intent, then there are other charges in which it's essentially criminally negligent homicide. And so that's what's being worked out, and why jury selection was pushed back. And the Attorney General of the state of Minnesota is Keith Ellison, who has a very interesting history in leftist politics within Minneapolis himself. He was famously a tweet of him in the Antifa handbook came out many years ago, and he has taken up cases historically in his that have been on the side of revolutionary political figures and so forth. So it's an interesting the scene in Minneapolis has a lot of specifics to it of itself, but he's the one who's at the helm of prosecuting Chauvin, and this ruling that the third degree charge has to be looked at again by a judge. We could be talking about this significantly, weeks down the line. My hope again is for reform, and for us to find the road ahead. And somebody said something positive. I just want to put a positive thing up.
But here's my thing: like, how can you reform what Derek?
Start local, make your daily life wonderful. Well, that's certainly a good sentiment, but being a part of local activism and looking at reform from a local perspective, and just in conversations that you have, I think that's a good sentiment. But what were you going to say?
So we talk about police reform, like. Did Derek Chauvin need to be trained not to put his knee on the neck of somebody for 9 minutes? Like, is that something that can be resolved via training? Like, he did not have the common sense as a human being to know that, or did he just not care because of George Floyd's appearance, his skin color, or whatever random crime he was accused of doing? I don't see how you can reform that. This is where this is the perspective that abolitionists come from. Like, you can't train someone not to be a murderous asshole. Pardon my language. I mean, what happened to Freddie Gray? What happened to Tamir Rice? What happened to Eric Garner? What happened to Abner Louima? Like, how can you train people? Like, police have to be trained. Like, please don't shoot at a 12-year-old holding a pellet gun alone on a playground within 3 seconds of, pulling up on it. Like, how can you train that out of the individual or the institution, right? Like, this is what they are trained to do, right? So I don't see how that gets reformed.
Well, and that's the big question that we need some sort of policing, I would assume. And so where do we go? And there's one case on that same This American Life episode. There was the Justice Department. It talks about the Las Vegas Police Department taking a number of suggestions from the Justice Department and being extremely proactive as to how they dealt with each one, and they were able to make a huge impact statistically. It's something that probably should be done by every police department as far as how we approach policing in the future. But you ask a relevant question. My hope is that people aren't, that level of apathy where somebody has one hand in their pocket and is on the neck of another person is not something that that is going to persist. That level of that hardening that certain members of different, mostly I would say urban police forces become a part of. And we do need to get that out. So you ask how, and then we need to answer it. We need to do something.
Yeah.
And
And the other ones that stood around and watched, how do you reform that?
Well, one of them was only on the job for 4 days. That is training. Right?
Exactly.
That
That's
is
the
training.
scary part. That's the training that he was receiving. And
Right.
only by the grace of God that incident was being recorded, because if nobody recorded it, we'd have never known. We'd have never known. They would have said, oh, George Floyd was high on this. He had meth in his system. That's why he died. That was the underlying cause, not the fact that he had a knee to his neck for 9 minutes. No. That's not what killed him. He had meth in his system. That's what killed him. Oh, okay. I get it. There's a lot of layers of complicity here when it comes to police murders. Again, I can't plug my friends more enough. Stephen Janis and Taya Graham of the Police Accountability Report, they've done reporting on this about how coroners and medical examiners will be, complicit along with the police narrative and say things like underlying health conditions is why a person died in police custody when the cause of death was very clearly caused by police violence. So there's a lot of unpacking we have to do here. The only reason, why I talk about like abolition and stuff like that is because I'm extremely impatient. I'm 42 years old. I understand now at middle age, like how fast 20 years can come and go. And my concern is that at 62, I'm going to be looking at a lot of the same stuff that I was dealing with when I was 22. And I don't have the patience for it. Like, I don't have the patience to continue to give this country time to progress. We just need a little bit more time. Well, as James Baldwin said, how much time do you need, America? Like, you're taking my time. You took my parents' time. You took my grandparents' time. You took my great-grandparents' time. Like, how much more time does America need to do right by people who are legal citizens of this nation, who serve and die in its wars, who pay taxes here? Like, I don't know how much time we need, nor I don't know how much time I'm willing to give the United States. So I'll leave my parting thought there, Jeremy. But thank you for giving me the opportunity to come on and have a good dialogue with your audience and talk about these issues. I'd love to come on and join you again.
We'll talk more. I think so, and I did enjoy this conversation. Thanks so much, Kim Brown. Everybody, I'll be back on Wednesday, and we'll all talk more. Take care.